Hi everyone. I recently read this book called The Science Delusion by Rupert Sheldrake, and I figured I would make a video responding to it. Now, I'm not gonna do a whole series responding chapter by chapter, like I did with Mariano's article. It's just not worth it. But fortunately, Sheldrake did something that I really like, and that is he asks questions in each chapter. So these are questions for materialists, and I think they're all intended to be gotcha questions, but I think I can answer most of them anyway. There are a couple of them that I can't answer, and I'll explain why. You'll have to excuse me, I've got my notes here. I can't be bothered to learn a proper script for this. I just want to get this over with. So I've got the questions here as well. Anyway, is the mechanistic worldview a testable scientific theory or a metaphor? Is the first question. Neither. The mechanism behind a phenomenon is the answer to the question, how does this work? When you ask that question, you make the fundamental assumption, or at least when you keep asking that question, you make the fundamental assumption that there is an explanation at some level, that there is a reason for why it works. There is a mechanism there, This isn't a metaphor, and it's not a theory developed by applying the scientific method. It is a necessary assumption that you have to make in order to even begin to apply the scientific method. If it is a metaphor, why is the machine metaphor better in every respect than the organism metaphor, which he presents in the text? If it's a scientific theory, how could it be tested or refuted? Not applicable given my previous response. Do you think that you yourself are nothing but a complex machine? Depends on how you define machine. Sheldrake defines a machine as something that has an intelligent designer, as opposed to an organism which does not. Wow, I guess that means he doesn't accept intelligent design. But anyway, if that's the definition of machine, then no, of course I'm not a machine, I'm an organism. But that's not a useful definition of machine as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it is a useful definition, but when I say that I think of myself as a machine or an organism as a type of machine, well, a machine is a system of interacting components. And if that's how you define machine, then yes, I'm a machine. All organisms are machines. This is actually pretty ironic because Sheldrake says that materialist atheists must believe. I think he actually says must believe, or that all materialist atheists believe, or that materialist atheism implies that you believe that you're a machine. But he also, by his definition, it's theists who believe we're machines, because it's theists who believe in intelligent design, not atheists, not materialists. So he's not applying the definition consistently. I don't know. He's just not making much sense. This is why it's really important to define your terms and use those definitions consistently. Have you been programmed to believe in materialism? That depends on what you mean by programmed. I have learned through experience that when I study the material world, materialism is a useful philosophical viewpoint. And I can't think of a more useful one. I don't think that counts as having been programmed. I'm not sure what you mean by programmed in this context. Is your belief in the conservation of matter and energy an assumption, or is it based on evidence? If so, what is the evidence? I don't believe in conservation of matter. In fact, I know that matter is not conserved. Matter can be produced through pair production. It can be destroyed by interaction with antimatter. So no, matter is not conserved, and I don't know who says it is. When it comes to the conservation of energy, that's definitely something supported by evidence, and I can give you a great example. Take a ball and drop it. Will it bounce higher than where you dropped it from? No, it never will. A pendulum will swing back and forth. It'll slow down due to friction, but it'll never go like whoa, 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 unless you actually push it. If left on its own, if it's just affected by gravity and friction, then it's going to slow down over time and eventually stop, because energy is conserved. Friction is applied, so there's a leakage. Conservation of energy is supported by I don't know how many observations. It's ridiculous to call it an assumption. It's definitely supported by evidence. Do you think that dark matter is conserved? No, I see no reason to think so. Just like normal matter isn't conserved, I don't see any reason to believe that dark matter is. If dark matter were conserved, then it would have had to predate the universe as well, which makes very little sense. Can you accept that there may be a continuous creation of dark energy as the universe expands? Yes, and that doesn't contradict energy conservation, because as the universe expands, it loses potential energy. An expansion, when something expands because of, well, I guess you can say when something expands spontaneously, it's because there's potential energy being released. The potential energy of the universe decreases. That means that when dark energy is created, there's a corresponding loss in potential energy. So the total energy remains constant. And it happens to be zero to the best of our knowledge, by the way. If there is a vast amount of energy in the quantum vacuum field, do you think we might be able to tap it? Well, I don't know that there is a vast amount of energy in the quantum vacuum field. There are calculations supporting this, but measurements don't support those calculations. But let's say for the sake of argument that there is, then yeah, I don't see why that would be impossible. I have no idea how it could be done, but to my knowledge, it wouldn't violate any laws of nature. So, sure, why not? If the laws of nature existed before the Big Bang and governed the Big Bang from its first instant, where were they? Okay, I'm not going to address the whole before the Big Bang issue. I'm just going to focus on the actual question, which is, where were the laws of nature? That's a nonsensical question. Laws are not, descriptive laws are not located anywhere. Well, I guess you can say that they're located in the mind of the person describing the universe. But laws of nature are not things. They are not physical objects that need a location. So the question makes absolutely no sense. If the laws and constants of nature all came into being at the moment of the Big Bang, how does the universe remember them? Where are they imprinted? Well, same problem. The question is nonsensical. How do you know that the laws of nature are fixed and not evolutionary? Okay, well, it kind of follows from the definition of a law. A law is a statement, a law of nature is a statement about the natural world which is always true under the specified circumstances. So if it changes, then it's by definition not a law. If a law appears to change, then what's actually happened is our understanding of the law was incorrect. So no, the laws of nature don't change. What's wrong with the idea that nature has habits rather than laws? Well, see previous answer. Do you believe that your own consciousness is merely an aspect or epiphenomenon of the activity of your brain? Yes. If consciousness does nothing, why has it evolved as an evolutionary adaptation? It does something. It allows us to be aware of our environment and not just react to it instinctively, but rather think about it, process information at a level that allows us to see beyond the immediate. This is necessary if we are to develop technology. Well, maybe not necessary, but it is how we ended up developing technology. So it definitely has an evolutionary advantage. Do you agree with the materialist philosopher Galen Strawson that materialism implies panpsychism? Okay, panpsychism is this idea that everything is conscious to some extent. And my answer is no. Not unless you redefine consciousness into something that makes it useless as a concept. Is your own belief in materialism determined by unconscious processes in your brain rather than reason, evidence, and choice? Another nonsensical question. Reason, evidence, and choice, or at least the perception of evidence, are all the result of unconscious processes in the brain. So I guess my answer to the question is yes. How do you know that there are no purposes in nature? I've never said that there are no purposes in nature. In fact, there are definitely purposes in nature. Wherever you have intelligence, you can have purposeful thinking. You can have people planning ahead, doing things in order to reach a certain goal. But that's not really what you mean, is it? I think what you mean is, how do you know that nature doesn't have a purpose? That is what you mean, right? And in that case, my answer is I don't. I just don't see that it does. If there are no purposes in nature, how can you have purposes yourself? Well, see my previous answer. How do attractors attract? An attractor is a mathematical abstraction. It's simply when a variable tends toward a certain value, then we say that that value attracts the variable. It's an attractor. That's a simple explanation of it anyway. An example of an attractor could be how entropy is always attracted to the highest possible value given the circumstances. Attractors don't actually attract. It's just that it's a way for us to describe something that occurs in nature. The mechanism behind this depends on what it is we're talking about. So there really is no single, simple answer to the question. Is there any evidence for the materialist belief that the entire evolutionary process is purposeless? Well, I'll ignore the sloppy language, I guess, and say that yes, there is evidence of that. We see that evolution happens in response to circumstances. Bacteria evolve resistance to antibiotics as a response to being exposed to antibiotics. Creatures become more tolerant of low temperature in response to a reduction in temperature. What we don't see is evolution planning ahead. We don't see every organism becoming more tolerant of lower temperatures, and then boom, the ice age hits. There is no planning. What we see is perfectly consistent with evolution being a blind process, and completely inconsistent with it being a guided process. Do you agree with Lewis Wolpert that by the 1st of May 2029, given the genome of a fertilized egg of an animal or plant, we will be able to predict, in at least one case, all the details of the organism that develops from it, including any abnormalities? If so, how much would you be prepared to bet on it? I have insufficient knowledge of the subject to answer that question. I wouldn't bet on it at all. I neither agree nor disagree. I don't have enough information to make a decision one way or the other. Sorry. I am not a geneticist. If you believe genes program organisms, how do you think the programs work? Same problem here. My knowledge of genetics is limited, to say the least. If you refer to instinctive behaviors, then I don't know. But what we do know is that instinctive behavior is affected by genetics. And the evidence for this, look at how we can domesticate animals by breeding the more social, more docile ones. The silver fox is a perfect example of this. Foxes make lousy pets because they're afraid of humans. Even when they grow up in captivity, even when they're tamed, they will be fearful of humans other than their handlers. But there's a fairly well-known case here where I believe it was in Russia, where silver foxes were taken into captivity. They were bred. They bred the more social ones, the ones that feared humans the least, and eventually they ended up with a fox that was actually a pretty good pet. So yeah, genes can affect behavior. The fact that I don't know how, well, that doesn't really change anything. Do you think that mathematical models will eventually explain the inheritance of form and behavior? If so, are organisms reifications of mathematics? Possibly and no. Mathematics would describe the phenomenon. I mean, if I describe something in English, what I describe is not a reification of English. How do you think the missing heritability problem might be solved? I don't know, Rupert. How do you think we should unify quantum mechanics and general relativity? Look, you're asking the wrong person. The fact that I'm a materialist doesn't mean that I have an answer to that question. Do you believe that memories are stored as material traces in brains? If so, can you summarize the evidence? Yes, and the evidence, well, for one, brain damage can cause memory loss, which wouldn't be the case if memories were stored in some magic field outside, or in the thought realm or whatever. How do you think memory retrieval systems recognize the memories they're trying to retrieve from memory stores? I don't know. I'm not a neuroscientist. I haven't studied the subject at all. Have you ever considered the possibility that memory might depend on some kind of resonance rather than on material traces? Well, yeah, when I read the book. If the trace theory of memory is a testable hypothesis, I thought you said it was a theory. Rather than a dogma, I thought you said it was a theory. How could it be established experimentally that memory depends on traces rather than resonance? Well, again, brain damage causes memory loss, or can cause memory loss. When you look at the sky, do you think the sky you are seeing is inside your skull and that your skull is beyond the sky? The sky is outside my skull. My perception of the sky is inside. My awareness of it, my analysis of it, and so on and so forth. If what you're asking me is, am I a solipsist? Do I think that the sky is just a figment of my imagination, that it's all in my head, Then no. No, I don't think so. Have you ever felt someone was looking at you from behind, or have you ever made someone turn around by staring at them? I know what feeling you're referring to. You're referring to paranoia, the feeling that you're being watched, so yeah. Well, I guess that's not really paranoia, but it's a form of paranoia. It's something that actually has an evolutionary advantage because it makes you more alert. It doesn't hurt that you're wrong. You turn around, there's no one there. Okay, big deal. Every now and then you're going to turn around and there's going to be someone there. And well, what if it's a predator, then it turns out that it had an evolutionary advantage to be on your toes, as it were. But when you're right, it's a coincidence, and that's what all experiments done actually suggest. Now, there is a meta-analysis of such studies mentioned in the book. It's an analysis by Schmidt et al. From 2004, and Sheldrake says that there is a slight positive result, and yeah, there is. But if you bother actually reading the paper, which I have done, then what you see is that the authors actually explicitly state that the studies they used are not reliable. They are of poor quality, and therefore they can't really draw any conclusions. There is a slight positive result, but this could simply be the result of the studies being bad. And that's always the case. When a study supports something paranormal, it's always a bad study. Gee, why is that? Do you believe that all your conscious life and all your bodily experience is inside your brain? Yes. In quantum physics, electrons are described by wave equations that include all the electrons' future possibilities, which are not material. Do you think that the possibilities among which you choose are more material than those of electrons? No, a possibility is not a material thing. It's a description of how material things may behave in the future. If you think telepathy and precognition are theoretically impossible or very improbable, can you explain why? Okay, I'm going to keep an open mind here and say that I don't think it's impossible. I think it's extremely improbable. Why do I think it's improbable? Well, I'll just put it like this. James Randi still has that $1 million check. It should be very easy for a psychic to demonstrate that his powers are real. But they can't, because there are no psychics. All psychics are either crazy or frauds. It's that simple. And that doesn't mean there couldn't potentially exist such a thing as a psychic, but at this moment, no, I don't think there is one, because he would be taking James Randi's challenge. He would be solving crimes. He would be winning lotteries all the time. And no, don't give me the whole I don't need the money bullshit. Donate it to charities, dumbass. No, reality is simply not consistent with these things being real. What we observe is perfectly consistent with these phenomena being non-existent. It's that simple. Have you ever looked at the evidence for psychic phenomena? If so, can you summarize it and explain what's wrong with it? Well, yeah, I have. It's laughable. there's never anything that can be duplicated under controlled conditions. Everything is affected by, or probably, I should say, affected by things like confirmation bias. There are no good quality studies that indicate that these phenomena exist. So there actually is no evidence. Have you yourself ever had a seemingly telepathic experience? No. What might persuade you to change your mind? Evidence. Have you ever consulted an alternative therapist? If not, would you ever consider doing so? No and no. How do you explain the placebo response? Self-deception. You perceive a symptom as being less serious or more serious than it really is, so you just don't experience it as it is. Your perception of it is altered. Now, because it's just your perception that's altered, that means that the placebo effect works great for things like pain relief. But it doesn't actually address the condition. It can affect a lot of things that have to do with, like, well, basically whenever your brain is involved, the placebo effect can work. But you're never going to heal a broken bone with it or something like that. So because it's really just the symptoms that are treated. How do you think governments and insurance companies should deal with the escalating costs of medicine? Well, one thing they can do is put pressure on pharmaceutical companies to make sure that they don't overprice their medicines. They could look over how patents work to make sure that there are actually affordable alternatives to the big brand name drugs that actually do the same thing. What I don't think governments and insurance companies should do is encourage people to seek alternative treatment that doesn't work. Because by definition, alternative medicine doesn't work. That's the definition of it. What do you call alternative medicine that works? Medicine. Do you think governments should fund comparative effectiveness research on different kinds of therapy, including alternative therapies? Yeah, I think governments should fund research debunking bullshit medicine claims, yeah. Society has an interest in making sure that the treatments that are offered actually work and are the best available. So yes, we should compare real working medicine with bullshit medicine and show that, hey, this over here, this is bullshit. And then it should be outlawed, by the way. At least it should be illegal to sell it as medicine. And it is. That's why it's called alternative medicine. Because it would be illegal to call it medicine because, it doesn't work. Experimenters' expectations are known to affect the results of research in psychology, parapsychology, and medicine, which is why researchers often use blind methodologies. Not in parapsychology, they never do. Do you think that at least not double blind. Do you think that experimenter effects should play a role in other fields, or could play a role in other fields of science too? It depends on the experiment. Whenever a data set is obtained by using judgment calls or asking for someone's subjective experience, then yes, experimenter bias is something that needs to be considered. But if we're just doing objective measurements, just looking at what a display says, it says 19.4, okay, then no, you don't need a blind protocol. Do you think that scientists and science students should write in the passive voice in the reports or use the active voice? So this means should you write, this was done, these chemicals were mixed together, or should we write Timmy mixed these chemicals together while I watched. The passive voice is, of course, this was done. It's impersonal, it's emotionless. It makes things dull and clinical, and that's kind of the point. It doesn't matter if you mixed the chemicals together or your assistant. We don't need to know that. What we need to know is that the chemicals were mixed together. This might make the paper boring to read, but it eliminates unnecessary fluff, and that's the point. Really, it's no big deal. I like the passive voice, but it's no big deal. As a convention, you typically use the passive voice. But is it wrong to use the active voice? No, I don't think so. Some might think so. I personally, I don't care. Most scientists publish only a small proportion of their results. Do you think that this is likely to introduce serious biases into the scientific literature? No. A bias toward the relevant. I mean, the question is specifically about bias, not about is it useful to publish bad results? Well, it might be, but that's not what the question is. I mean, it's great to publish results so that others can look at it and say, hey, I see what you did wrong here. That's useful, but that's not what the question is about. The question is about bias. And no, I don't see how it could introduce bias. How should scientists deal with ideologically, politically, or commercially motivated skepticism? It's called skepticism, Sheldrake. This is not a typo. You actually get this wrong all the time. There's no such thing. Skepticism is just skepticism. It doesn't. There's no difference between what motivates you. I think what you're referring to is things like oil companies being commercially motivated to deny global warming, for example. That's not skepticism. But if that is what you're referring to, then that's an issue that isn't one for scientists specifically to deal with. That has to do with public education. People need to understand what skepticism is. People need to know how to spot bullshit. That's pretty much it. And you're not really helping. There you go. I'm sorry I had to read from notes all this time, but there was a lot to go through. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. See ya.